So in Algebra 2, we like to study graphs a lot. And one of the things that we ask you to do is analyze graphs. So if we give you a picture of a graph, we want you to be able to tell us a whole bunch of information just from looking at that. All right, so it is a step up from Algebra 1, but everything has a graphical representation, and we really like you to know how to look at that graph and tell us a lot of key things. So one of the first things we're going to ask you to do is identify domain and range of a graph just by looking at it. And this is going to be a tricky thing to do because it's totally reliable on your sight. You have to train your eyes how to look for it. There's no work to be done. You just have to see it. So for some kids, this clicks right away. This just means you're a very visual kind of learner, and when you see things, it clicks together. Others, it's going to take some, maybe a lot of examples for it to finally click and make sense. But once that click happens, it's easy to remember. Okay, so just have some patience with this. It does take practice for a lot of people. Some things you can do to help yourself beforehand is remember that domain means x. And x values take place on the x-axis, and the x-axis goes sideways. So when you're looking for domain, you want your eyeballs to be moving left and right? Not up and down, just sideways. I want to know where's the left endpoint and where's the right endpoint. I don't care about all the stuff in the middle, I just want to know about the ends, okay? Now, some of these pictures, you have to lift your pencil. If I asked you to trace over them, you would have to lift your pencil up to do it. If you have to lift your pencil, we call that breaking because you broke contact with your paper. When you're doing domain and range, you have to specify where the break occurred. And because it's domain, I want the x-coordinate of where the break occurred. When you're doing range, because range means y values, you want to train your eyes to go up and down, not sideways. So I'm interested in what is the very top point and what is the very bottom point. What's the highest point? What's the lowest point? Again, I don't care about all the stuff in the middle, just the extremes. And once again, did you have to lift your pencil? Because if you did, you have to tell me where that break occurred. But this time I want the y-coordinate of that location, not the x-coordinate. So the best way to learn this is to learn by doing, just jump right into it. So that's what we're going to do. Now when we do this, we're going to use what's called interval notation. So if it's a solid dot, we'll use a bracket. If it's an open dot, we use a parenthesis, and interval notation uses commas. So we'll just wade into the water here. So the first thing you're going to do is look, we're going to do domain. That's what D stands for. There's a lot of stuff going on with this picture. It goes up and down and up and down and up. I don't care. I want you to find the very left endpoint, which is right here. That would be your left endpoint. There is no part of the graph that goes past that on the left side. And you're going to do the same thing for the right side. So the very right endpoint would be right here. So it might be a good idea to circle those when you're doing your domain. Now, in terms of values, you want the x-coordinate of that dot. So that would be -4. So the point furthest to the left goes -4 left. The point furthest to the right, that's right here, that goes +4 to the right. There was no break. I didn't have to lift my pencil at all, so I'm totally fine to write that. There's a solid dot on the left end, so that gets a bracket, but there's an open dot on the right end, so that gets a parenthesis. And that's how we're going to do our interval notation. Right now, range is highest dot and lowest dot. So I might put a star next to my highest dot and a star next to my lowest dot. And it's totally normal for a range and domain to overlap. It's just how it works out on the picture. So your highest point has a height of 4. That's as high as this guy goes. Your lowest point has a height of -4. That's as low as it goes. Now I'm putting brackets on both of these because There's solid dots at both of my stars. So both the lowest and the highest points are solid dots. That means you get brackets. And that is your first interval notation. Now I do want to specify that if you have these switched, like let's say you have the 4 first and then the -4, that's fine as well. So that does not matter how you have it. Some teachers are a little nitpicky about it, but it does not change the outcome. This is the domain section. So in my class, you're totally fine to switch these. Just make sure the bracket stays with the -4 and the parentheses stays with the 4. All right, we'll go ahead and try that again. So again, we're starting with domain. I'm looking for a left endpoint and a right endpoint. Now this guy has arrows, so look at the ends. Okay, those arrows means it will continue this way forever. So as this goes down, it also goes outward. It's kind of like moving in a diagonal fashion. So it goes down and outwards as well. So we're never going to hit a left endpoint. It's going to keep moving left forever. And we're not going to hit a right endpoint either. So our domain is going to be from -infinity to infinity. We never had to lift our pencil, so I can just write them side by side with a comma. Now in terms of range, which is highest versus lowest, the highest point is right here, and you can see that has a height of 4, so that's as high as it goes. But it does not have a lowest point because it goes down forever. That means -infinity. So down forever is -infinity, up forever is +infinity, left forever is -infinity, and right forever is +infinity. All right, then we'll try one more. This is really tricky, this one right here. So first things first, this is the graph of the function 1 over x minus 1. So if you were to type this formula into a graphing calculator and hit graph, this is the picture that you would get. So it kind of looks weird, doesn't it? It's like you have a curve on the top right, but you have this other little curve on the bottom left. Now, one thing a calculator does not do, it does not put arrows on the ends of your graphs for you. So you would have to just know that those are there. This line right here, that is called an asymptote. So we're going to write that down because that is a key vocab word that we want to master this year. Right. More specifically, this is a vertical asymptote because it goes up and down. Asymptotes are imaginary lines that you get closer and closer to without ever actually touching. So you see this blue curve right here? We are getting closer and closer and closer to this line, but we're never actually going to touch it. It's the same thing down here. We get closer. As we go down, we get a little closer every time to that pink line, but you never actually touch it. Now kids will say, well, how's that even possible? Well, if you think about 1/2, if you take half of that, that's a 4th, and half of a 4th is an 1/8, and half of an 1/8 is a 16th, and so on. These numbers are all getting smaller as we go along, but we're never actually going to hit 0. These get closer and closer to 0, but you're never actually going to hit 0. All right, so we call that in math what's called a limit. All right, so limit means, hey, what are you approaching without ever actually hitting? So we approach 0, but we don't actually hit it. And that's what's happening here. See how this goes through 1 on the x-axis? That means from left to right, we will approach that 1, but we'll never actually touch it. All right, so that's what we're going to write. Now, when I write my domain, you see there is an arrow pointing to the left, so there is no left endpoint. And we have an arrow pointing to the right, which means we have no right endpoint either, but we do have a break. If you were to trace this graph just like this, you're going to have to lift your pencil to resume on the other side. That means you have a break, and you have to expose where the break occurred. Now, since we're doing domains, you have to tell me the x value of the break. The break is going to be where the asymptote is. So this domain broke at 1. So we go from the left all the way to this pink line, which is at 1. We get closer and closer without touching it. And then we have to pick up our pencil and immediately resume drawing after the 1. And this will go towards infinity, because there is no right endpoint, so you'll need a positive infinity. So again, that's a hard concept to grasp. A lot of high school students have trouble understanding that and seeing that. So I'm just going to give it one more effort to try to help tie that story together for you. So what we have is we started on the left, and as I traveled on this path, I got closer and closer and closer. Even if I'm going downhill, I'm still moving to the right. I'm getting closer and closer to an x value of 1. But then I had to pick up my pencil and start right after 1, and I gradually move to the right. Again, I don't care if I go up or down. I just care about, do I move sideways, left and right? And that's what this means. It means you started on the left, you worked your way up to 1, but you never actually touched 1. So that's why we have to use a parenthesis, because you're not allowed to touch asymptotes. And then we picked up right after 1 and continued on our way. Now it's going to be the same thing for our range. Now they did not draw this for you, so you're going to draw this yourself right now, okay? Let me change colors here, make it a little bit easier to see. We actually have a second asymptote, and it's right here. So what happens is you can see there's an arrow pointing to the bottom. So our range has no endpoint, no lowest point. All right, so negative infinity. But what happens is we gradually go up, right? Even though I'm going left now, I'm still going up and up and up and up and up and up, but I'm never actually going to hit this purple line. Now this purple line goes through the ordered pair 0, 0, goes through the origin. And you always take the y-coordinate for range. So it's going to break at 0, and then immediately I'm going to pick up after 0 and work my way up and up and up. So we have no lowest point, we have no highest point, but we do have to break at 0. We have to hop over that 0 line. So again, that is a hard concept to teach because you have to just see it. So if I can make it a little easier for you and just get you to memorize this for the time being, wherever your vertical asymptote is, that's the number that you use for your domain. And wherever your horizontal asymptote is, that's the number you use for your range. Right? And once we do several of those, I think that'll start to click. So in our next video, we'll go ahead and just practice domain and range for a whole bunch of different graphs.